what is your take? Because I don't believe any of us are Native American Indians, so we are all descendants of most likely legal immigrants. That's how the system works.
Right. Look, well, first of all, you want to know why I'm running for Attorney General? That's why. Because a group of Attorney Generals, I will predict to you, is going to stop the implementation of that nonsense. It almost certainly is going to violate the Administrative Procedures Act. It's going to trample all over the Constitution. And what we are seeing right now in this area of law and lots are state attorneys general banding together to say, no way. That's what happened on that 3D printing gun case and a bunch of other stupid stuff. So set aside the immorality of this for a minute. Thank God the system allows for us to put the brakes on. But on the merits, this is crazy. We are seeing an all-out attack on vulnerable populations. We saw kids being separated. I've got a member of my staff whose parents were thrown out after living here 30 years. Her dad was so depressed he died of a heart attack when he got back to Mexico. Those are people who are nonviolent, who are working 2 jobs, who have never done anything wrong after they came here with a misdemeanor illegal entry. What the hell are we doing? It's immoral.
6 million open jobs and Americans who don't want these jobs. Here's the thing, David. The president is very good at branding and selling. And I'm guessing if I were to watch this segment on a conservative media outlet, they would say, do you want immigrants here who are living off the system, who are on the welfare system? And people could say, absolutely not. But that welfare system includes Obamacare. It includes child health insurance, which loads of people aren't.
Right.
Those are the systems millions of people use.
Right. He's framing an issue for voters, and it's heartbreaking. And it's not just Donald.
And it's a lie.
It's a lie. It's not just Donald Trump. It's also the Republican Party. The Republican Party and Donald Trump, because nobody's going to push back on Donald Trump from the Republican Party. Every single move they make on immigration is to make it harder for people to realize the American dream, to make it harder for people to immigrate here, in this case, legally. They are framing an issue for November that they believe will distract the American people from all these other Trump down ballot negatives. But along the way, they're also bearing the heart and soul of the Republican Party, and it's wrong. To your point that it's lies, my wife and I just went to a naturalization ceremony for a group of refugees. Now, this is a different immigration class than those that are being talked about. And I learned something that day that was fascinating. The local organization in Florida that provides the immigration or refugee resettlement services told us that when a refugee comes here, you know, it takes several years. You're vetted by 4 or 5 different agencies. You arrive, you have 60 or 90 days to have housing and a job, and then you have to pay the U.S. government back for your plane ticket. So in terms of those who are here legally somehow sucking off of the system, it simply doesn't happen. And if it does, it's only because they are just as eligible as those who were born here to receive the very services of the government that they have pledged their loyalty to and asked to be a patriot for.
People who are part of the E-Verify system are paying taxes when they work.
That's right.
And then when they get kicked out of the country, no one is sending them a check. So, Sean, immigration lawyers are saying this could impact 20 million immigrants, yet it's not going to require congressional approval. And you could say states' attorneys general are going to stand up and fight this. Can they really? And what can the American people do about it? If I ran a small business and I needed to have employees, this could put me out of business.
Right. They can fight it and they can slow it down. Ultimately, we need to win elections. Ultimately, it's what we were talking about in the last segment. Ultimately, you're gonna like the Muslim man, you're gonna force him into a less damaging version of it, but there'll be action the president of the United States can take. It's also racism, by the way, if we can just say that. This is an attack on non-white people. It's been at the core of this administration from the beginning. We should stop beating around the bush on it. And we see the president doing it every day. When he gets in political trouble right now, he goes back to this toxic, poisonous well of racism where he goes after black athletes or he goes after immigrants who his base imagines to be of a different race.
Why?
And it's just wrong.
Why doesn't this matter to the Republican Party? George Bush won on compassionate conservatism. And Republicans have spent years trying to convince people, listen, I understand that you think that there are traces of racism, or we only want to work for the rich, but that's not us. And now you've got an administration that's saying, that's us, and I'm wearing a T-shirt that says it.
Bush 43, John McCain, Mitt Romney, they tried to quiet and hush those voices within the Republican Party. From Sarah Palin to Donald Trump, you can draw a direct line of candidates who empowered them, invited them to the table, affirmed them, and now given them leadership roles, in this case within the administration. But very importantly, there is a way to stop this in September. Congress has to pass an appropriations measure before October 1. And what
does what?
to fund the government. And what is routinely done on Capitol Hill, is a single provision in an appropriations bill that says none of the funds provided in this bill may be used to implement the following rule. Congress, the Republican Congress, can stop this if they have the courage to do it, but they won't because they're cowards.
I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. That's right. They don't have the courage to do it, but the voters can do it for them, and that's where we have to get on this.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.